And we're coming to you live from Miami Shores and Bruton, Alabama. Two places not much similar, except that we love weather and we're going to bring you everything we can on this wonderful Thursday evening covering Tropical Storm Erika. I'm Rich Robinson, and my partner Spinks Megginson, as I mentioned, is in Bruton, Alabama.
Yeah, that's right, Rich. We are watching Tropical Storm Erika this evening, and the storm is not intensified. That's good news. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment. Here's the storm right now. It's located very near the Windward Islands, the Virgin Islands, and you can see this new burst of convection here, this area of red, indicating that perhaps over the next, say, 72 hours, we could see some intensification as it potentially crosses Hispaniola and ultimately could weaken after that. But then, you know the drill, these things can fire back up over water, and as it approaches Florida, something to watch in the coming days, Rich.
That's right, Spinks, and we appreciate that. We'll get back to you in just a second. Here in Florida, people continue to prepare for the storm or what may become of it. We're not 100% sure. Little preparation on the ground locally, although Governor Rick Scott did make a statement earlier today, just kind of signifying that the state government is prepared for whatever is to come. Locally, we continue to monitor it. Spinks, I'm interested in this. I saw earlier today as well that these cones have a way of sort of getting people the wrong impression, right? It's a large cone, very large area, room for error here, but the city of Miami and South Florida remains dead center in that cone, or close to it anyway, and it's important to continue to be prepared.
Yeah, that's right, Rich. In fact, we'll go ahead and look at the official cone from the Hurricane Center now, and I'll show that official graphic from the Hurricane Center. This is exactly what you would see if you log on hurricanes.gov. So that's hurricanes.gov to get the latest information from the Hurricane Center, which, by the way, is based in Miami, Florida. So they're in the thick of this. Right now, the center of the storm located about 150 miles to the southeast of Puerto Rico, very near the U.S. Virgin Islands. You see these islands shaded in this dark blue. That's indicative of a tropical storm warning, meaning tropical storm conditions likely in those areas in the next 24 to 36 hours. And in this case, for Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Dominica, and several other of the northern Windward Islands, that means that tropical storm conditions are happening right now. In fact, earlier today, the National Hurricane Center did confirm via the government of Dominica, which is one of the smaller islands there in the Leeward Island group, that we actually had a few fatalities due to Erika. So we're not sure if that's mudslides or water related, but we will find out, I'm sure, in the coming days what caused those fatalities specifically from Erika. Let's talk about the cone, though, as Rich was talking about. You can see how thin this cone is. Very strong model agreement indicating that Erika will move to the northwest in the coming days. Here's the deal, though, and we're going to talk about this in just a few minutes. There are a few scenarios that could change the strength of the storm. If the center of the storm moves over this mountainous region of the Dominican Republic, that could actually tear the system apart and perhaps dissipate the system entirely. However, if the center of the storm moves just to the north of Hispaniola and the Dominican Republic, that could mean that it has a higher chance of strengthening in the days ahead, because waters out here over the Bahamas, north of Cuba, just to the southeast of Florida, are some of the warmest ocean water on Earth right now, meaning that Erika could certainly tap into that and potentially become a hurricane as it moves to the north. As you can see in this forecast cone, lots of uncertainty in the 3 to 5 day window. However, one thing is for sure. If Erika survives the mountainous terrain of the Dominican Republic and Haiti and reemerges over the Turks and Caicos Islands, strengthening will almost certainly occur. There's just no doubt about that. With the warm water here to tap into, the storm will certainly get stronger as it moves off to the north and the west. So, Rich, still looking at this cone of uncertainty, and really It's just anyone's guess as to where this thing will go long term. One thing has become clear though, Rich, over the past 12 hours per se. We've got a big ridge of high pressure out here over Bermuda, and of course in the northern hemisphere, high pressure, the air around the high pressure moves in a clockwise fashion. So it seems like in this area, you know, earlier in the week we thought that Erika may recurve out to sea. We can safely say at this point that will not happen.
That's interesting, Spinks, and it's funny as you mentioned this, we're getting in the new 8 p.m. advisory. Let's just, for the folks at home, give a little bit more of an update. Of course, this is the intermediate advisory, so not a huge change from the 5 p.m. advisory. We're expecting the full advisory at 11, so we'll get much more information at that time. But just to have the latest up-to-date information, the storm as of now continues to have maximum sustained winds of 45 miles per hour. It is 145 miles southeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico seems to be right in the middle of this cone, and it looks like it would be hard for them to miss the impact of this storm. Although it is a weak system, it is expected to drop a lot of rain on Puerto Rico. And as Spinks mentioned earlier, 12 inches of rain in 12 hours in Dominica. 4 people were killed, many more continue to be missing. So a bit of a human tragedy happening on the small island of Dominica in the Caribbean. Spinks, I'm curious in this as well as we continue to look at your new graphic there. As this storm continues to move over the Puerto Rico, and then it may very well be interfered with by the Dominican Republic and Haiti, what type of energy would that take out of the storm if it went right over those land masses?
Yeah, Rich, it would be potentially a devastating blow to the strength of the storm. I did want to show you this. You see this large blob of convection, and basically what you're looking at, because the sun has set in this area, we have to use infrared satellite, and this actually tells us how cold the cloud tops are in the storms east of the center of Erika. Understand, even though we have this tropical storm in the Caribbean Sea now, the center has actually been displaced from the main thunderstorm action. For us and for all our friends in the Caribbean, that's good news. We want these storms to blow farther away from the center to keep the storm weaker. In fact, the center of Erika is probably somewhere right in this area. So this burst of convection is located to the southeast. As Rich mentioned, this storm is going to have to traverse over some really harsh terrain. In fact, this is a look at the Dominican Republic. Right here, of course, it's also home to Haiti on the western side of Hispaniola. And here is San Juan, Puerto Rico. So as the storm moves over these areas of land, of course, that takes the water source out of the equation. And these high mountains in the Dominican Republic specifically could really rip the storms out from Erika and cause significant weakening in the days ahead. Let's put this into motion just so you can see exactly where this thing has moved over the past several hours. And again, much of the thunderstorm action is displaced off to the east. You see, it's really hard to see the circulation on this infrared satellite, but it's somewhere right in this general area with much of the convection displaced from the center. And as I mentioned, that keeps the system weaker. Hopefully that trend will continue. In fact, if it continues as the system moves over these high mountains, that very well could rip the system apart, as Rich just mentioned. So, Rich, hopefully that will happen. That's one of the scenarios on the board, but we'll certainly have to keep an eye on the remnants of Erika, even if it does become ripped apart over the Dominican Republic.
Sure thing, Spinks. And I guess my next question for you is that there's still so much up in the air with this particular storm, and we've heard a lot about scenarios about different ways that this can go. I know that there are a few, so it's important for the audience to kind of get a good feel for what that could actually be. Of course, one scenario is the storm gets ripped apart, as you just mentioned, and then it becomes nothing more than a low pressure system, which becomes a rainmaker for the rest of the Atlantic Basin. Of course, it could also turn out a bit differently. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those scenarios and what we can expect in the coming days.
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. Let's go ahead and look at a few of the models. This happens to be the global forecast system, and this is one of the models that we use on a daily basis to predict your weather. So this is a look at Erika as it stands right now. I'm going to step off screen to advance the model. You can see that deep area of convection really showing up on the GFS. Let's go ahead and move the model forward, and as we do that, I'm going to go back and forth here. You can see that the GFS is really indicating likely that the center of the storm will remain north of Hispaniola if this model happens to be correct. Understand, this is not a forecast, this is just a model, one of the tools in our toolbox that we use to make the forecast. So we'll go ahead and advance the GFS forward, and as we do that, we will see that the center of the storm moves into the Turks and Caicos here, and as it approaches Florida, you can see the GFS indicating that the storm is really holding its own here in the southeastern Bahamas, here in the Turks and Caicos. We'll advance it even farther forward, and this is actually a look at the GFS on August 31st, which, Rich, if I'm correct, I think that's Monday, if I'm not mistaken. And if the model happens to be correct, this would have the center of the storm somewhere near the northern part of the Bahamas. And of course, that could mean that we could have some heavy rain in the greater Miami area, specifically over South Florida, maybe even some heavy rain as north as areas like Daytona Beach. So, Rich, in the days ahead, the GFS seems to indicate that Erika will move up the eastern side of the Florida Panhandle. And obviously, this is getting to a point of uncertainty in the model where it's just anyone's guess. This is about 6 to 7 days out. If this happens to be correct, it has Erika really moving parallel to the shore, almost near the Jacksonville area in the northern part of Florida. So obviously many questions at this point. This is just one idea on the table. Things could change drastically even as soon as tomorrow, as you know.
Well, that's absolutely right. It is that time of year as well, Spinks. Before I get to our next point, I am curious. You talk a lot about these models. Are there particular models that we should add more weight to or that we should pay attention to more? There definitely seems to be great variation in these models and how they operate. We hear a lot about the European model, for example. We hear about the American models. We hear about all these different models. Are there models, in your opinion, that we should be paying attention to more? Or how should we even approach the use of models while watching other outlets and watching forecasts?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rich. And one of the things that we look at on a daily basis, as Rich just pointed out, are models. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to go to the web here, and you can type in spaghetti models, very simple, on your web browser and get a look at exactly what forecasters are seeing in terms of what they're using to make their forecasts. One model that I look at on a regular basis is the GFDL model, and that also the model that the National Hurricane Center uses in their forecasts. So what Hurricane Center? However, you see all these other colorful lines, and they're pretty basically from after your, say, 48 to 72 hour point, there's significant divergence in the model set. So
fire drill and that it doesn't become anything at all for Florida. And of course, there's a large percentage that may end up happening, may end up being the case. Spinks, as we go back to kind of the broader picture here in our closing minutes, I think it's important for people to remember there is a tremendous amount of fluidity in this situation. It really could go one of many ways. That makes it very complicated. But from your perspective, from the weather perspective, what is the most important takeaway for our audience this evening?
Yeah, Rich, no doubt. The most important thing, we have all got to be prepared. As I mentioned in our earlier videos this week, regardless of what happens with Tropical Storm Erika, whether she ends up, I should say it ends up, moving out to sea, whether it impacts Florida or even gets in the Gulf of Mexico, it is super important that all of us be prepared on a daily basis. One of the things we can do, know those evacuation routes. Should Erika become a strong storm, which at this point seems fairly unlikely, we would of course have to evacuate from South Florida. Anywhere near the coastline of the southeastern U.S., you've got to evacuate if you're near water. Another thing you can do, have that hurricane prep kit ready if you have to ride out the storm. In that prep kit, what should you have? You should have at least 3 days of non-perishable food and water. In addition, flashlights, batteries, important medicines, documents, things of this nature. Regardless of what happens with Erika, it's super important to be prepared. One thing I wanted to hit on as we conclude this evening, let's zoom into South Florida right now, and what you're seeing there, these semicircle looking things, this is the 34 knot wind fields, and this is a product that the National Hurricane Center issues every advisory for tropical systems. Basically what this semicircle is saying is, in this yellow zone here, inside this yellow semicircle I should say, that's where they're expecting tropical storm force winds if this forecast happens to be correct. In the center of Erika, if it ends up being right there where that white T is, that means that likely we would have tropical storm force winds in this area. Rich, if we extrapolate this out, the system continues moving to the north, that would place at least minimum tropical storm force winds over South Florida. So even if the system, the center of the system, remains offshore and it continues moving off to the north, we're still going to have tropical storm force winds in the Miami area.
I also saw, Spinks, earlier today, the wind field. I believe you're alluding to the same type of thing from the Weather Service. They have a map that shows the wind field, a 50% chance that the city of Miami could be impacted as of right now by tropical storm force winds within 72 hours. So that, to me, you're going to pull it up right there, what I was referencing earlier. So it puts Miami right in that 50% range.
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. And you notice in the 5-day forecast window, this thing gets a lot wider. In fact, as Rich alluded to now, about a 50% chance that within the next 120 hours that the city of Miami could have tropical storm force winds of at least 39 miles per hour. It's still 5 days out. Obviously, this thing could shift back into the Atlantic, and obviously the percentages would go down. Or perhaps we could see a shift to the west, and then much of South Florida, south of Lake Okeechobee, would be in this higher percent zone of seeing tropical storm force winds in the 100-hour period. As I mentioned a minute ago, the bottom line, we've got to be prepared.
Very good, Spinks. We appreciate the hard work this evening. We'll be back tomorrow evening doing a similar broadcast, and every evening after that, until we can get this storm safely behind the United States on the southeastern coastline. So, Spinks, we greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Rich. See you then.
One other piece of housekeeping before we leave our broadcast this evening. You can visit Spinks Megginson at his wonderful weather information and team, and absolutely, it's an amazing experience. You got to go to rzweather.com to learn more about what he is doing. And to stay up to date, you can also follow him on Twitter at rzweather on Twitter. For us on the news side, you can go to risemiaminews.com, which chances are you're already at watching this video. And you can follow us online, on Twitter, at Rise Miami News. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tomorrow, we'll be back around the same time, 8 p.m. Be sure to follow us on social media for more information. Be weather aware, and we'll see you tomorrow.